A worried daughter stepped into an argument to protect her mother, and moments later, she was shot dead. Authorities determined that it was self inflicted, even though the autopsy told a very different story. The physics don't make any sense, and yet somehow the man holding the gun walked free just 5 days later. For years, her then 6-year-old daughter grew up believing the story that she was told until she started pulling the records for herself. What she found was disturbing. There was missing evidence, weapons, sealed documents, and a case that was never fully investigated. This is the story of Kimberly Fields, and today we're going to learn why her daughter Kyla is still fighting for her mother's justice. Welcome to the True Crime Nurse, everybody. My name is Kat, and I'm a registered nurse who loves all things nursing and true crime. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell before you go. Please excuse my voice today because I'm very, very sick right now. Working full-time as a nurse and recording during sick season definitely poses some challenges, but hey, I'm here. All right, my friends, let's get into it. Kimberly Shante Fields was born on June 12, 1974, in Illinois to her mother, Catherine. Kim's family describes her as beautiful, strong, resilient, and fearless. She was a no-nonsense type of woman who laughed easily, joked with strangers, and carried herself like someone who could handle whatever came her way. She always took care of others, even when she was struggling, and that is a very rare trait. Her daughter Kyla said that in her family, her mom was the glue. Kim worked alongside her mother, Catherine, at Cece's Income Tax and Accounting Services, and they were actually working on a second location that Kim was supposed to manage on her own. It sounds like this was a family of successful, driven women, and I can definitely see that in her daughter, Kyla, too. Kyla remembers shopping trips with her mom, grandmother, and aunt that always ended up back at the house with a fashion show and lots of laughter. This made me smile because I love that moms do this. They love to see their babies model the new clothes that they just bought for them. But Kim was turning everyday errands into memories without even trying. One of Kyla's most treasured memories with her mom was that as a child, Kim called her Snickerdoodle. That is the cutest nickname. Kyla thought that it was silly, so she actually asked her mom to come up with something else, but instead, Kimberly doubled down, pulled her baby girl close, tickled her, and said, "You're my Snickerdoodle." That was Kim. She just seemed so playful and loving. Family members said that the party didn't start until Kim walked in, and nights out would turn into 4 in the morning adventures, and Kimberly was always ready for whatever came next. When she walked into the room, people noticed her. Losing a light like Kim did not just take her life, though. It fractured the people around her, and the confusion surrounding the way that she died would linger far longer than the night itself. On January 7, 2009, Kimberly Fields was staying at 2275 Lester Road in DeSoto County, Mississippi. The house belonged to her mother, Catherine, and also living there was Catherine's husband and Kim's stepdad, Andrew Stokes. The relationship dynamics inside that home were complicated. According to Kyla, Andrew and Catherine argued, and there was some tension and arguments in the home. Things had been physical in at least one argument, but it didn't seem to be one-sided either. Kyla remembers one confrontation vividly. Catherine, Kim's mom, challenged Andrew directly, daring him to put his hands on her. Andrew denied pushing her, claiming that he was only trying to get her attention, but what stood out the most was not just the argument itself. It was the calculation and tone behind it. Andrew knew that physically harming Catherine would only escalate into something much bigger, so he seemed to tread pretty lightly, at least in front of other people. It's hard to know if things had gotten worse in the days leading up to Kimberly's death, but one thing is for sure. When Kimberly heard threats towards her mother, especially involving weapons, she would have intervened immediately. That instinct to step in, to protect, and to de-escalate was just a part of who she was. So, now that you know a little bit about the background, we're going to get into the night that everything changed. Kyla was just 6 years old the night that her mother was shot. Her memories of that day are hazy, which we know from prior cases and childhood trauma that typically clouds our memory. She remembers being woken up late at night by her aunt, and there was no trouble before she had went to sleep that night. But when she woke up, the house was full of police officers and chaos. Officers were in her bedroom and in her mother's bedroom, and her mom, Kim, was not in her bed. Everything was a blur, and she was too little to fully understand what was going on. Her aunt got her dressed quickly and led Kyla out the back door. It was dark outside, and Kyla isn't sure whether or not that was intentional, meaning maybe the lights were off to shield her from seeing something that she shouldn't. She only remembers being guided away. Later, while she was sitting in the car, she remembers waiting for her grandmother to come outside. Then she noticed an ambulance, a stretcher, and all the police cars, but she does not remember seeing her mom. Another key family member that she didn't see was Andrew. Eventually, her grandma Catherine got into the car. They drove to her aunt's house, and that was the end of the night as Kyla remembers it. For many years afterwards, she would ask herself the same questions over and over. What happened to her mom? Why didn't she hear any arguing? Why didn't she hear her mother get out of bed that night? And most importantly, why didn't she hear a gunshot? Trauma does strange things to memory, especially in kids, but silence to a sleeping child does not mean that nothing happened. It means that the mind may have protected itself by shoving down a traumatic memory. After many years of wondering what actually happened, when Kyla was about 15, her grandmother Catherine finally opened up. This is the story she was told. Catherine and Andrew were arguing that night, and things escalated quickly. Kimberly intervened and she grabbed a knife to separate the two of them and told Andrew he needed to leave. Andrew went in to gather his things and he took his shotgun to the studio apartment that was just above the garage. Kimberly fought to take the gun from him, probably in fear of her mother's safety, and it bounced off of the ground and went off from the vibration, shooting her in the chest. Even at 15 years old, though, that explanation did not make sense to Kyla. Let me know your initial reaction to this because I feel the same way. I have so many questions just based on that scenario. What family didn't know was that by then, Kyla had already seen Andrew's mugshot online. She kept this to herself for years, and she had many questions that no one in the family had answers to. The physics about the shotgun alone felt wrong. Guns don't just discharge from being dropped, so the idea that her mother somehow caused her own death while trying to stop a fight between her mom and stepdad, Kyla felt this didn't add up. She was young, but she accepted the story she was given, even though she had her doubts. Kimberly Fields sadly died between 10:30 and 11 p.m. on January 7th, 2009, before she could make it to the hospital. Her death was only covered one time in the media, so the majority of the documents that I used for today's case came directly from her daughter, Kyla. Andrew Stokes was arrested that night, and we're going to get into those details a little later on. But Kimberly's death certificate said that the manner of death was self-inflicted. But don't go yet, because the evidence and the autopsy report are going to tell us a very different story. According to the DeSoto incident report that I read, also known as the police report, officers responded to a shooting at 2275 Lester Road. The first responding officer arrived and found Kimberly Fields lying on her back in the bedroom doorway in the northeast corner of the house. She had what appeared to be a gunshot wound to the chest just below the left breast. Andrew Stokes made a spontaneous statement at the scene to the police officers. He said that he and a witness had been involved in a verbal argument when Kimberly attempted to intervene. At some point during that altercation, Stokes claimed that he was just trying to leave when Kimberly grabbed the shotgun. The discharge of the weapon was implied but never directly stated by Stokes. He worded his words very carefully. He said, quote, "I didn't mean to do nothing. The gun just went off. She snatched the gun, she pulled it, and had it in my hand, and it just went pop." A witness who lived in an unattached garage apartment said that he was asleep at the time and was uninvolved. Multiple deputies and investigators arrived and began investigating the scene. However, none of the crime scene data has been given to Kyla. More to come on that later, though. Andrew Stokes was transported to the DeSoto County Sheriff's Office and placed in a holding cell around 1 in the morning, and the officers noted that Stokes smelled strongly of alcohol both inside the home and in their patrol car. He admitted that he was drinking prior to the incident. Now, being under the influence not only alters your actions in the moment, but it can also impair your memory. Keep that in mind as we continue on in today's case. Before we get into the investigation, though, and what's transpired since, one of the most important pieces of today's case is the autopsy. This is key to understanding the question of, did Kim do this to herself like the police claimed? Now I'm going to go over the majority of what the coroner wrote. Kimberly was a 34-year-old Black female whose body showed no signs of neglect or chronic illness. She was normally developed for her age, standing 64 inches tall and weighing 153.5 pounds. There was very little trauma on Kim's body aside from the fatal gunshot wound. Her hair was black and braided. Her eyes were clear, her mouth, ears, nose, and neck were all normal. One important external finding, though, was evidence of emergency medical interventions that were performed on scene. There was an incision on the left side of her chest where a chest tube had been inserted. And from a nursing perspective, this tells us that the first responders recognized this was a significant internal chest injury. So they attempted to relieve some of the pressure or drain blood from the chest cavity in order to try to save her life. The fatal injury was a contact shotgun wound located around the left breast. A contact wound means that the muzzle of the shotgun was literally pressed against her body when it went off. This is one of the most destructive types of shotgun wounds because there is no loss of energy before it makes impact. All of that force, heat, gases, and projectile material are driven straight into the body, and this causes catastrophic injuries. The entrance wound itself was oval in shape and it measured about 1.5 inches by 3/4 of an inch. So it was present around the wound, which confirmed that this was a contact or very close to contact wound. There was also a visible defect in the left breast tissue, and the wound track traveled backward through her torso. Internally, the damage was devastating. The blast shattered the left lateral ribs, specifically 7 through 10, and these fractures alone would have caused severe pain and compromised the structural integrity of her chest. More importantly, broken ribs can puncture the blood vessels and organs, worsening internal bleeding and making it impossible to breathe. The force of the shot pierced through her diaphragm, and this is the muscle that separates the chest from the abdomen and plays a critical role in breathing. A perforated diaphragm disrupts normal respiratory mechanics, and that would actually allow blood and air to move abnormally between the cavities, making breathing nearly impossible too. The left lung sustained a contusion, meaning that it was bruised and filled with blood and fluid as well. A lung contusion severely interferes with oxygen exchange. Even if the lung is not fully punctured, it becomes stiff and inefficient, which only compounds all the other injuries at this point. The shotgun pellets and blast then perforated the stomach, and this is a very vascular area. An injury here causes both rapid bleeding and leaking of stomach contents into the abdomen. That combination leads to chemical irritation, infection risk, and further shock. In trauma, gastric perforations significantly worsen outcomes because they can contaminate the abdominal space and can complicate recovery down the road. The spleen also suffered from extensive lacerations. This is one of the most significant findings in Kim's autopsy. The spleen acts as a blood reservoir, so when it's torn, it can bleed profusely in a very short period of time. These injuries are notorious for causing rapid hemorrhagic shock or extreme blood loss. Without immediate surgical intervention, splenic bleeding alone can be fatal. The left kidney also sustained a grazing wound, and even though it was just grazed, a superficial injury to the kidney can also cause significant bleeding because it's also rich in blood supply. This added to the overall blood loss throughout her body. Inside the left chest cavity, the ME recovered intact plastic from the shotgun shell, along with numerous lead pellets, and this is particularly important. In firearms injuries, the plastic usually falls away shortly after the shot, so finding this deep inside of her chest strongly supported the fact that the gun was fired directly against her body. There was also a left-sided hemothorax containing approximately 350 milliliters of blood. A hemothorax means that blood had collected in the space between the lung and chest wall, and this is dangerous for two reasons. First, the blood physically compresses the lung, making it harder to expand and breathe. This is why they attempted to insert that chest tube. Second, it's hidden blood loss. 350 milliliters is a significant amount of blood, especially when combined with bleeding from the spleen, stomach, fractured ribs, and kidney. Kimberly Fields clearly died because of the shotgun wound to the torso. The injury caused massive internal destruction, including the shattered ribs, the perforated diaphragm, lung contusion, gastric perforation, extensive splenic lacerations, a kidney injury, and a significant hemothorax. These injuries resulted in rapid internal bleeding, compromised breathing, and overwhelming trauma. But most importantly, based on these findings and circumstances, the death was ruled a homicide. If the ME determined that this was a homicide, how could this be self-inflicted like the death certificate said? Now, to go back to the investigation, Andrew Stokes was no stranger to law enforcement. There were several calls that were placed prior, and these incidents involved fire, motor vehicle theft, concealed weapon violations on not one, but two occasions, abusive calls to emergency services, alcohol purchases for a minor, and murder. These are not small charges by any means. These all compile to paint a picture of the man that was familiar with police and firearms and one who had a documented history of volatile behavior. Now remember, on the night that Kim was killed, officers noted that Stokes smelled strongly of alcohol, which we've kind of already touched on. He admitted that he had been drinking. This detail matters not because it just affects his memory, but because intoxication combined with firearms significantly increases the risk of fatal outcomes. In many jurisdictions, this alone would elevate concern about recklessness and or criminal negligence. Stokes was booked into DeSoto County Jail like we touched on, and this was actually on an abusive call. His bond was later set to $1 million though because the charges had turned to murder. $1 million bond is not the norm, and it speaks volumes. Dollar amounts this high are usually reserved for cases involving extreme violence, flight risk, or public safety concerns. For Kimberly's family, though, it may have felt briefly like the system recognized the seriousness of her death, but that feeling didn't last. 5 days after his arrest, Andrew Stokes was released on bond, and it was posted by Catherine, Kimberly's mother. Catherine was behind her daughter when the gun went off and maintained that she always felt that it was an accident until her death. This detail sits at the center of many unanswered questions in this case. Catherine was grieving the violent death of her daughter, and she was also the person who paid to free the man who, at minimum, had been holding the gun that killed her daughter. Andrew Stokes walked free less than a week after Kimberly's death, and there would be no trial. The judge involved in the early proceedings of this case was Judge Karen Sanders, and this is a DeSoto County judge who her own conduct has gained quite a bit of attention lately in the media. Not long after Kimberly's case faded from the spotlight, Judge Sanders was arrested for driving under the influence. Investigative reporters also raised questions about unequal treatment and concerning behavior in how her arrest and release were handled. Now, we obviously know that this doesn't prove misconduct in Kimberly's case specifically, but it does add some troubling context here. The system responsible for handling a homicide had some internal credibility issues on their own, and for Kimberly's family, especially her daughter, as she was growing up, it became impossible to separate the handling of the case from the people who were controlling it. In a fatal shooting, there are standard investigative steps that are expected. These include at minimum full crime scene photos, gunshot residue testing, firearm analysis, interrogation recordings or transcripts, the 911 call transcript, witness statements, and detailed evidence logs and chain of custody of the documentation. What exists in Kimberly's case, though, does not reflect that standard whatsoever. Kyla is next of kin, so she should have zero trouble whatsoever getting access to all of these documents, right? Wrong. When police documents were eventually released to her, many of the pages were redacted. Even with those redactions, though, inconsistencies stood out, and I caught some myself. The investigators' comments were not at all like a full homicide investigation. In fact, they were brief, vague, and lacked any sort of depth. The most alarming issue involved the handling of the physical evidence, though. All of Andrew Stokes' firearms were returned to him in 2020. On that same day, all remaining evidence from Kimberly's case was destroyed. Among the destroyed items was the shotgun alleged to be the weapon that was used in Kimberly's death, so crucial evidence that Kyla needs to re-examine her mother's case is now gone. On one of the documents, July 31st, 2010 was listed next to the shotgun, but strangely enough, that date did not appear on the property log paperwork. It was not documented like the other evidence. Every other item had a clear collection date, collecting officer, and address, but the shotgun did not. That's a concern. Firearms used in suspected homicide cases are typically kept indefinitely, especially when a trial hasn't occurred. Destroying the weapon eliminated the possibility of future forensic testing, re-examination, or any independent analysis from happening. Returning weapons to a suspect instead of retaining them as evidence is extremely unusual involving fatal shooting cases. As Kimberly's daughter grew older, though, and started to research on her own, including the type of shotgun, another problem became clear. Based on Kimberly's height, weight, and physical reach, she would not have been capable of shooting herself with that weapon, even if it were by chance. Long guns require specific positioning, grip strength, and trigger reach, so even in accidental discharge scenarios, the mechanics still matter. Now, I'm obviously no expert here on this, but based on my research, shotguns don't just fire because they're dropped. Modern shotguns require deliberate pressure to the trigger, so the idea that a shotgun could bounce off the ground and discharge from vibration alone is not supported by firearm science. Multiple law enforcement professionals would later confirm this. One of the most obvious inconsistencies in Kim's case, though, was the cause and manner of death. The autopsy report did not list a cause of death, and Kyla found this through her own research and investigation. She also let me know that her family had only seen the death certificate, and it wasn't until last year that Kyla shared the autopsy report with them. Both Catherine and Kimberly's sister had only seen the death certificate shortly after Kim passed away. When Kyla contacted the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's office years later, she spoke with a staff member named Stacy, and she provided some insight on what the internal records actually said. Stacy confirmed that Kimberly's death was in fact listed as a homicide. I read that report to you earlier. That directly contradicted Kimberly's death certificate, which again listed the manner of death as self-inflicted. This is a major flaw, and it was confirmed by the ME's office. Stacy also said that the coroner's office had some confusion over who had possession of the gun. This was all very overwhelming and disturbing to Kim's daughter. When Kyla asked more questions, she was told that the computer system used at that time couldn't be amended once information was submitted. According to the current coroner, whose name is Josh Pounders, this may have been why the self-inflicted ruling was still there. He did confirm that the documents he had showed homicide, though, just like Stacy said. Kyla also contacted the sheriff's department and was told that their system was down and that they'd call her back, but they never did. At that time, she was young, overwhelmed, and had no idea where to begin or even how to advocate for herself and her mom. She had the death certificate and had been trying to investigate further on her own, but she needed help and more information. She let it go because she didn't have the tools at the time to push harder. Some time passed, though, and on May 15th, 2025, she tried again. She contacted the DeSoto County Sheriff's Department and the coroner's office and the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's office requesting all documentation related to her mother's death. She searched the Mississippi Public Inquiry System and she found something shocking. Andrew Stokes was listed under a charge for murder in the Justice Court. When she emailed the court for clarification, she was told that it was just a mistake. The Justice Court sent her Andrew's booking report, but it didn't match what she saw online. One section classified the charge as a misdemeanor, but the code at the bottom was for a felony. Even the court date didn't match up. So much was not adding up at this point. When she contacted the circuit court, she was told that the only document still on file was the docket sheet. The case had been no true billed, which means that a grand jury declined to indict. Any remaining documents would only exist at the district attorney's office if they still existed at all. Kyla then requested records from everyone, and the police documents finally arrived, but many of the pages were redacted, and this reminds me so much of Tawana and Kyle's story. Some of the most important information was clearly missing, though. There were no interrogation transcripts, no gunshot residue, no crime scene photos, and no 911 call recordings. She was told that she had been given everything they had, but Kyla knew that that couldn't be true. After months of unanswered emails and redacted paperwork, she made a decision that unfortunately many families face when institutions stop responding to them. She went to Mississippi in person. Her first stop was the district attorney's office, and she hoped that speaking face to face would force them to help her after being met by so much silence. She was directed to an investigator there named Chad Gatewood. Gatewood reviewed the documents that Kimberly's daughter brought in with her, and as he looked through them, something shifted. He didn't dismiss her concerns, and he didn't deflect. Instead, he said plainly that her mother did not shoot herself. He told her that based on the information available, a more appropriate classification would have either been an accidental death or manslaughter. An accidental death means that there's no criminal intent, but manslaughter acknowledges criminal responsibility without intent to kill. Neither of these scenarios support Kimberly Fields doing this to herself, so we know that the death certificate is wrong, and this requires a deeper investigation. Gatewood also told her that reopening the case could risk double jeopardy for Stokes. In her mind, that explanation didn't make any sense, though, because Andrew Stokes had never been tried for her mom. There had been no jury, no verdict, and no acquittal, and double jeopardy is when someone has already been prosecuted for the same events. Gatewood said that he would look further into it, and he gave her his card. When she followed up with him later on, though, she received no response. This was yet another dead end. After leaving the DA's office, she went to the DeSoto County Sheriff's Department. She spoke with two individuals, one who worked in forensics and another officer who reviewed her paperwork. Their reaction was the exact same as Gatewood's initial reaction. They were confused. The forensic staff member looked at Kimberly's height, weight, and the type of weapon listed, and she stated that Kimberly could not have shot herself. She explained that the wound appeared close range and reiterated a basic but critical fact that shotguns do not discharge by being dropped. The forensic employee also appeared motivated to help, and she mentioned that there was a box of discs that contaminated some crime scene materials. She offered to look for them, and she specifically mentioned crime scene photos, the 911 transcript, and other evidence that Kyla had been requesting for months. For the first time, she finally felt heard. A short time later, the forensic employee sent Kyla a message and said that she could not locate the disc with the photos. When she followed up and asked about the other materials, she got a phone call. She was told that to obtain anything further, she would need a lawyer. This was yet again another abrupt shift. Everyone's willingness to help had suddenly disappeared over and over again. There was no explanation as to why materials that had been acknowledged as existing were now inaccessible, and no explanation for why she, as the next of kin, couldn't get them. Everyone has inadvertently made it clear that they want Kyla to stop asking questions and lawyer up. Back at home, Kimberly's daughter contacted multiple attorneys, but most of them said that they don't handle cases like this. Others told her that she would need to file a complaint with the Mississippi Attorney General's office, which she did, and the response that she received from the Attorney General's office was deeply discouraging. She was told to continue contacting the same offices that had already refused her help, so at this point, she was stuck in a closed loop. The one firm that did review the documents, though, was the Cochran firm. After they reviewed it, they told her that she would only require legal representation if she were trying to take something to court, but because she's next of kin, she is entitled to those records. I can't imagine how frustrating this was to have the authorities say she needed a lawyer, and then a lawyer tells her that that's not the case and she doesn't need them. At this point, exhaustion set in. She began questioning herself and wondering if grief was clouding her judgment. This is a common experience for people who face challenges like this, especially when they're met with resistance at every single step of the way. Just last month, she emailed the district attorney's office once again, asking for a formal review of her mother's case. She explained all of the discrepancies, referenced the autopsy findings, described the missing evidence despite mentioning that those discs do in fact exist, but she received no response. That silence, more than anything else, solidified her belief that the system had failed her mom. I think what bothers me the most about today's case is that Kimberly Fields' life was tragically lost, and her daughter's story is not just that her mother's death was mishandled, but that she was raised in the home of the same man who benefited from it being ruled self-inflicted. If Kimberly's death was self-inflicted, then Andrew Stokes is not a suspect. If it was homicide or manslaughter, he is. I think we all understand by this point that nobody believes that Kim did this to herself, but the ruling shaped everything else that followed. It determined whether evidence was preserved or destroyed, it determined whether charges moved forward or stalled, and it determined whether Andrew remained a presence in the family's life or not. Years later, Kyla even learned that her grandmother knew the autopsy listed the manner of death was homicide. Despite that, she told the family that the death was self-inflicted, and her aunt said that Catherine admitted that she'd asked for self-inflicted to be listed on the death certificate. And remember, 5 days after Andrew's arrest, Catherine bonded him out. Another revelation that came from Kimberly's sister, so Kyla's aunt, was the story that she was told didn't match what Kyla had been told, and it's the one that Kyla believes is true. Her aunt said that Catherine and Andrew were fighting, and they had guns pointed at each other, and Kimberly stepped in to protect her mom. That's when she was shot. Many of these facts are heavy and difficult to understand because they intertwine with family dynamics, loyalties, and pressures that I don't think any of us here can truly understand. Kyla shared the documents that she received with her uncle, who's a former law enforcement officer in Mississippi, and he said that in a case involving a fatal gunshot wound, the documentation here was grossly insufficient. I can also tell you that in seeing the documents myself, there is so much missing. I want you to think about that for a second. Where did all the investigative findings go? After the police arrived at the house, security measures are taken and experts are all brought in. They treat everything with caution as a crime scene to preserve its integrity automatically in cases like this since Andrew was arrested. So where did all of that go? If the state ruled this as self-inflicted, why can't that information be released to Kyla? And why has everyone initially helped her, then slammed the door in her face? The file did not look at all like a complete investigation. Entire categories of expected materials are missing. And the fact that evidence was destroyed and weapons were returned made it impossible to ever reconstruct what happened through forensic means. To me, This is one of the most concerning aspects of today's case. Kyla's not asking for revenge. She's asking for acknowledgement, transparency, and for the truth to be reflected in the record. She needs justice for her mom, whatever that looks like. This is where we all can come in now as fellow community members. Kyla is asking anyone who feels prompted to sign her petition for her mom's case to be looked at again. I'm going to be linking the change.org petition down below that she created. It takes just a couple of seconds, and there is power in numbers, so I will be sure to put it in the description box down below. Another way that we can help is to contact the DeSoto County District Attorney's Office directly by email or phone and ask if they're willing to open Kimberly Fields' case. Kimberly was a daughter and, most importantly, a mother. She was the life of the party. She was the woman who stepped in when others were in danger. And she deserves to have her death described honestly, whether this results in Andrew Stokes being arrested again or not. Kim's daughter deserves to know the truth. Kyla, thank you for trusting me to help tell your mom's story. I know that we've had a few exchanges back and forth, but you truly are a light, and I'm sending you and your mom so much love. We are all here for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for spending time with me today. This case meant a lot to me to share because Kyla is a member of our own little community here, so I know how much it means to her that you listen to her mom's story too. Thank you for being patient last week while I was working on several cases, and just for being the best friends on the internet that I could ever ask for. Please be sure to take great care of yourselves this week, and don't forget our secret handshake in the chat, our blue butterfly. I'll see you next time. Bye.